The search for peace had become the defining quest of my late 50s. After 3 decades navigating the concrete canyons and shark-infested boardrooms of a high-stakes career, all I wanted was quiet. I craved the gentle lapping of water, the rustle of leaves, and the glorious, uninterrupted silence of a life free from conflict. I found it, or so I thought, in a place called Willow Creek Estates. It was a newer development, carved out of a sprawling tract of old farmland, designed for people like me, professionals easing into retirement who wanted modern homes without the urban grind. My particular prize, the one I paid a significant premium for, was Lot 1. It was the largest parcel, tucked away at the end of a cul-de-sac, and its southern edge was defined by a small, pristine, 5-acre body of water the developer had christened Mirror Lake. The lake was the reason I bought the property. It was mine. The plat map was unequivocal. The title insurance was iron-clad, and the deed was as clear as the water itself. The property line extended 50 feet out from the shoreline at its high water mark, encompassing the entire lakebed, my own private sanctuary. I envisioned mornings with coffee on a small dock, afternoons spent casting a line for bass, and evenings watching the sunset paint the water in hues of orange and violet. It was the perfect antidote to a life spent under the fluorescent hum of office lights. I'd been moved in for exactly 4 days when I met Carol Baxter. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The air was warm and smelled of freshly cut grass and damp earth. I was on my knees in a patch of dirt that was destined to become a rose garden, humming to myself, when a shadow fell over me. I looked up, shielding my eyes against the sun. A woman stood on the edge of my lawn, hands on her hips, with a posture so rigid it seemed carved from granite. She was in her late 60s, with a helmet of blonde hair that looked impervious to wind, and a pastel pink tracksuit that screamed leisure with the militant authority of a drill sergeant. In one hand, she clutched a clipboard. "You must be the new owner of Lot 1, she said. Her voice wasn't a question. It was an accusation. I stood up, wiping my dirt-caked hands on my jeans. "I am Alex Thompson. Nice to meet you." I offered a hand, which she completely ignored. "Carol Baxter. I'm the president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association." She surveyed my property, her eyes darting from the moving van, still half unloaded in the drive, to the nascent garden, to the shimmering surface of the lake behind me. Her gaze lingered on the water. "We're all very excited to finally have someone in this house. It will make access to the community lake so much easier for everyone." The statement hung in the air, a tiny, perfectly formed grenade of presumption. I felt a familiar weariness, a ghost of the boardroom tensions I thought I'd left behind. I decided to disarm it gently. "Ah," I said with a soft smile. "I think there might be a small misunderstanding. The lake is actually part of this property. It's not a community amenity." Carol's smile, which had been thin to begin with, vanished entirely. Her lips pressed into a single, bloodless line. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" "The lake," I repeated, still aiming for polite and neighborly. "It's private. It was deeded with Lot 1. I specifically chose this property for that reason." She took a half step onto my lawn, her sneakers sinking slightly into the new sod. It felt like an invasion. "That's impossible. The developer promised us all lake access. It's the central feature of Willow Creek. We are the Willow Creek HOA. It's our creek, or lake, whatever." "I can assure you, it's not," I said, my tone firming slightly. I had personally spent a week with my lawyers going over every line of the covenants, deeds, and surveys before signing. I knew my position was unassailable. The common areas are clearly defined in the HOA bylaws. They include the main gate, the small park on the north side, and the walking trails. The lake on Lot 1 is explicitly excluded. A faint, pink flush crept up Carol's neck. Well, we'll see about that. I am the president of this board. We have rules, covenants. You'd do well to read them. I have, I said calmly. Extensively. Perhaps you should. 2. Section 4, paragraph B, subsection 12, I believe. Her eyes narrowed to slits. It was the look of a monarch who had just been informed by a peasant that her throne was, in fact, just a wooden chair. She was so taken aback by the direct, factual rebuttal that she was momentarily speechless. She glanced at her clipboard as if it might contain a counter-argument, finding none. Her gaze snapped back to me. We have a board meeting on the 1st of the month. This will be the primary topic of discussion. In the meantime, she said, her voice dripping with condescension, I'd suggest you work on getting that moving truck out of your driveway. They're not permitted to be parked overnight. It's an eyesore. Without another word, she turned on her heel and marched back across the lawn, her pink tracksuit a beacon of righteous indignation. I watched her go, a sigh escaping my lips. The pleasant scent of grass and earth now seemed tainted. My peaceful sanctuary had a gatekeeper, and I had just told her, in no uncertain terms, that her key didn't work. The battle for my quiet life, I suspected, had just begun. The first salvo arrived a week later, delivered by a fresh-faced teenager in a golf cart, with the Willow Creek logo on the side. It was a crisp, cream-colored envelope, embossed with the same logo. Inside, on thick, self-important letterhead, was a formal notice of bylaw violation. My heart, conditioned by decades of receiving legal correspondence, gave a tired little thump of resignation. I read the notice, and my resignation curdled into disbelief. Then, a flicker of amusement. Violation. Section 7, paragraph C, landscaping and natural areas. Infraction. Unapproved modification of shoreline vegetation. Details. The homeowner of Lot 1 has allowed unapproved and aesthetically displeasing reeds and cattails to grow along the southern bank of the lake. This constitutes a violation of community standards for manicured landscapes. Action required. Remove the offending vegetation within 14 days. Fine, if not remedied, $50 per day. I walked to my back window and looked out at the lake. The offending vegetation was a small, naturally occurring patch of cattails in a marshy inlet, a place where red-winged blackbirds darted and dragonflies danced. They were part of the lake's ecosystem. To call them an unapproved modification was like fining God for making the sky blue. This wasn't about bylaws. It was a transparently petty power play. Carol Baxter was testing the fences, looking for a weak spot. My professional life had taught me one crucial lesson: never let a challenge, no matter how trivial, go unanswered, and always create a paper trail. My first instinct was to laugh and throw it in the trash. My second, the one forged in countless depositions and contract disputes, took over. I went into my home office, a room still smelling of fresh paint and new carpet, and began to formulate my response. First, I took high-resolution, time-stamped photographs of the cattails from multiple angles. I then went to the county's online records portal and downloaded the original environmental impact statement and the approved landscaping plans filed by the developer, Terra Struck Development. As I scanned the PDFs, a wry smile touched my lips. The documents, which I had a vague recollection of reviewing years ago from the other side of the table, specifically designated the marshy inlet as a protected natural wetland habitat to satisfy county ecological requirements. The cattails weren't just approved. Their removal would be a violation of the developer's agreement with the county. I sat down and drafted my response. I didn't write it as Alex Thompson, new retiree. I wrote it as A.M. Thompson, the man who had spent 30 years dismantling bad faith arguments for a living. Dear Ms. Baxter and the Willow Creek HOA Board of Directors, I began. I am in receipt of your Notice of Bylaw Violation, dated September 25, 2025. I must respectfully contest this notice in its entirety, as it is factually incorrect and legally untenable. I laid it out in numbered paragraphs, a habit I couldn't shake. I cited the exact language of the bylaw she had quoted, then demonstrated how it did not apply to naturally occurring vegetation on a body of water that was, per the recorded plat, private property. I then moved on to the more potent ammunition. Furthermore, I wrote, I would direct the board's attention to the original Willow Creek Estates Environmental Impact Statement, filed with the county on October 17, 2019, under file number ENV 2019-482. Section 9, subsection D, Protected Habitats, explicitly identifies the southern inlet of the body of water on Lot 1 as a designated wetland area, required for stormwater runoff filtration. The vegetation you have ordered me to remove, including the Typha latifolia common cattail, is integral to this designation. Removal of said vegetation would constitute a breach of the development's foundational agreement with the county, potentially incurring significant fines for the responsible party. I attached copies of the relevant sections from the county records, my property deed, and the plat map, highlighting the key phrases with a digital yellow marker. I concluded the letter with a tone of cool, professional courtesy. Given these facts, I trust the board will agree that the violation notice was issued in error and will move to retract it immediately. I have no intention of removing the vegetation and will consider any fines levied on this matter to be illegitimate. Please confirm in writing that this notice has been rescinded and that my account is clear. I printed the letter and all its attachments, a formidable stack of paper. I drove to the post office and sent it via certified mail. Return receipt requested. It was an act of disproportionate response, like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. But I knew people like Carol Baxter. They didn't respond to polite conversation. They responded to overwhelming, documented, and legally fortified pushback. They respected the threat of liability. For 3 weeks, there was silence. I saw Carol's golf cart making its rounds, her sharp eyes always seeming to linger on my property as she passed. But no further notices appeared in my mailbox. I began to hope, foolishly, that my meticulous response had been enough, that she had recognized I wasn't some pushover who would buckle at the sight of official-looking letterhead. I had shown my teeth, and perhaps she had decided to find easier prey. I was wrong. This was not the end. It was merely the end of the phony war. The real campaign was about to begin, and it would be fought not with letters, but with insidious, creeping aggression. The quiet lasted for another month. I settled into a routine. I finished unpacking, set up my workshop in the garage, and began the slow, satisfying work on my rose garden. I'd brought several prized bushes with me from my old home, carefully nurturing them for the move. 1. A deep crimson hybrid called Mr. Lincoln was my particular favorite. I planted them along the side of my house. Near the property line I shared with a small, manicured common area. They were just beginning to produce their first buds. My first inkling that the war had simply shifted to a new front came on a Wednesday morning. I was watering the new buds when I noticed the grass around them looked unwell. It was yellowed and brittle in a strange, circular pattern, as if someone had spilled a chemical. I bent down, my knees cracking in protest. The soil felt gritty, And when I touched a wilting leaf on one of the rose bushes, it crumbled to dust in my fingers. I smelled the soil, a faint, acrid scent of salt. Rock salt, the kind you use to de-ice driveways in the winter. In September. There was no way to prove anything. It was deniable. A kid could have done it. It could have been an accident. But I knew it wasn't. It was a message, delivered under the cover of darkness. Your property is not as private as you think. The things you care about are vulnerable. My jaw tightened. The peace I'd come here for felt like a distant memory, replaced by a cold, simmering anger. This was no longer about bylaws. It was petty, malicious vandalism. I spent the rest of the day in a controlled fury. The boardroom strategist in me took over. I needed to control the narrative, control the evidence. I drove to a big box hardware store and bought a state-of-the-art security system. Not just a doorbell camera, but 4 high-definition, night vision-enabled cameras with motion sensors. I spent the next 2 days running wires through my attic, a frustrating, sweaty job that left me covered in insulation and grime. I mounted one camera overlooking the driveway, one on the back porch facing the lake, and one on each corner of the house. The last one had a perfect, clear view of my ravaged rose garden and the common area beyond it. I linked them to a dedicated hard drive in my office, setting them to record on a continuous loop. I was building a fortress, not of brick and mortar, but of data. A week later, I got a notification on my phone while I was at the grocery store. Motion detected by the side yard camera. I pulled it up, my heart thumping. The video showed Carol Baxter's golf cart pulling up to the edge of the common area. She didn't get out. She just sat there for a long, deliberate minute, staring at my house. She looked directly at the spot where the camera was mounted, though she couldn't have seen it from that distance. A slow, knowing smile spread across her face. Then she drove off. It was nothing. And it was everything. She was letting me know she was watching. Now. She knew I was watching back. The next escalation came not with salt, but with pixels. Our neighborhood had a private Facebook group, Willow Creek Neighbors Connect. I had joined it during the escrow process, thinking it would be a good way to meet people and learn about local services. It was mostly posts about lost dogs, recommendations for plumbers, and announcements about the community potluck. Then, Carol discovered it as a weapon. The first post was a masterpiece of passive aggression. A friendly reminder to all residents, she wrote, that common areas are for the enjoyment of all dues-paying members of our community. It's a shame when some people, especially newcomers, have an attitude of, what's mine is mine, instead of embracing the spirit of sharing that makes Willow Creek so special. A little generosity goes a long way in being a good neighbor. There was no mention of my name or the lake, but there didn't need to be. Everyone knew. The subtext was as clear as the water in my lake. The comments started rolling in. You tell 'em, Carol, from a woman named Barb. So true, some people are so selfish. From another, one of Carol's board cronies, a man named Gary, added, the board is working on resolving a certain access issue right now. We appreciate your patience. I felt a hot flush of anger and humiliation. She was turning the entire neighborhood against me, painting me as a greedy villain who was hoarding some mythical community treasure. I had a sudden, visceral urge to respond, to post my deed and the plat maps and the environmental impact statements for all to see. But again, my training kicked in. Never argue with an idiot in a public forum. It lowers you to their level, and they beat you with experience. Engaging would only add fuel to her fire, make me look defensive and petty. So I did nothing. I watched, I read, and I saved. I took screenshots of every post, every comment, every veiled accusation. I created a new folder on my computer, HOA Harassment. The file containing my initial response letter was the first document. The video of Carol's golf cart was the second. These screenshots became the third. I was building a case, documenting a campaign of targeted harassment with the same dispassionate precision I would have used for a corporate lawsuit. The social pressure began to mount. My immediate neighbors, a nice retired couple named the Hendersons, suddenly seemed awkward around me. Their friendly waves became hesitant. At the community mailbox, people would go quiet when I approached. I was being systematically isolated, cast as the neighborhood pariah by a woman wielding a keyboard and a sense of entitlement. The posts grew more direct. A week later, another one from Carol. So disappointed to see that some residents have chosen to install excessive and intimidating surveillance equipment. This is a safe, friendly community, not a fortress. It creates a very unwelcoming and paranoid atmosphere. We on the board feel it is contrary to the open and trusting environment we strive to maintain. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. She was objecting to the very security system I had installed to protect my property from the vandalism she had implicitly encouraged. The comments were even more fawning this time. "It makes me uncomfortable knowing I'm being filmed just walking my dog," one person wrote, despite the fact my cameras only covered my own property. The feeling of peace I had sought was now a cruel joke. My home, my sanctuary, had become a defensive position. Every time I stepped outside, I felt the weight of unseen, judgmental eyes. The quiet I craved was now filled with the phantom chatter of online accusations and the low hum of my own simmering resentment. Carol Baxter wasn't just trying to take my lake. She was trying to take my peace of mind. And that was a line I would not let her cross. The question was no longer if this would end, but how I would end it. The weaponization of the neighborhood gossip mill was one thing. The weaponization of actual government agencies was another. That's when I knew Carol had moved from being a mere nuisance to a genuine threat. This was no longer about social dynamics. It was about leveraging official power to harass me. It arrived on a Monday, looking far more intimidating than the HOA's cream-colored envelope. This one was brown, with a window showing my name and address, and a return address that made my stomach clench: Pine County Department of Environmental Quality. My hands were steady as I opened it. A learned calmness from years of facing down corporate raiders and hostile attorneys. The letter was formal, dense, with bureaucratic language. It stated that an anonymous complaint had been filed regarding Lot 1 at Willow Creek Estates. The complaint alleged potential contamination of a private waterway due to improper use of fertilizers and pesticides, and possible unpermitted shoreline modification resulting in significant soil erosion. Improper use of fertilizers. I looked out the window at my beleaguered rose garden. I used organic fish emulsion. For God's sake. Unpermitted shoreline modification. I hadn't touched the shoreline, except to pull a few stray weeds by hand. The allegations were pure fiction, spun from thin air, but they were now enshrined in a government file with my name on it. The letter informed me that a county inspector would need to schedule a site visit within the next 30 days to take water and soil samples. The cold anger I'd felt before was now sharpening to a fine point. This was a classic tactic of attrition. Bury your opponent in paperwork. Tie them up with bureaucracy. Make their life so difficult they finally give in just to make it stop. Carol couldn't win on the facts of the property line, so she was manufacturing new fronts, hoping to find one where I was vulnerable. She was counting on me being a typical homeowner, intimidated by the official letterhead, unaware of the process, and likely to capitulate. She had, once again, profoundly misjudged her opponent. This was my turf. Not just the physical land, but the legal and regulatory landscape it occupied. For 20 years, my primary role at TerraStruck had been to navigate this exact labyrinth of environmental regulations, zoning laws, and land use permits. I had forgotten more about the Pine County Environmental Quality Code than Carol Baxter would ever know. I sat down at my desk, pulled up the files for my property, and got to work. First, I pulled the original soil boring logs and the Phase Y environmental site assessment that TerraStruck had commissioned before a single shovel of dirt was turned. They showed the baseline soil and water quality was pristine. Next, I pulled my own records. I had the receipts for the organic fertilizer and a logbook where I noted my gardening activities a habit from my detail-oriented professional life. There was no evidence of pesticide use because there was none. The erosion claim was the most laughable. The modification was the patch of cattails she'd already tried to fine me for. The very ones the county had insisted remain as a natural water filter. Her complaint wasn't just baseless. It was a verifiable lie. But I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to go on the offensive. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in almost a year. Marcus Thorne. A deep, familiar voice answered. Marcus, it's Alex Thompson. Alex, you old son of a gun. I thought you'd fallen off the face of the earth. How's retirement? You bored yet? Ready to come back and save us from ourselves? Marcus had been my lead hydrologist at TerraStruck for 15 years. A brilliant, cantankerous genius who could read a topographical map like a novel. Retirement is eventful, I said dryly. Listen, I need a favor, not an official one. Just some friendly advice. It involves Pine County DEQ. I explained the situation in precise, technical detail. I didn't frame it as a fight with a crazy neighbor. I presented it as a legal and regulatory problem. I talked about riparian rights, baseline water quality data from the initial EIS, and the absurdity of the erosion claim given the county's own requirements for the wetland buffer. Marcus was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was laced with disbelief. Let me get this straight. The HOA President is using the DEQ to harass you over a wetland buffer zone that you yourself negotiated with them to get the whole project approved in the first place, Alex. You literally wrote the book on this site. You know every pipe, every culvert, every drainage easement from memory. That's the one, I confirmed. He let out a low whistle. She picked the wrong guy to poke with that particular stick. So, what's the favor? I'm going to compile a full response package to the DEQ. I explained. The original Phase Y, the soil logs, my gardening records, the whole 9 yards. But I want to make sure it gets to the right person, not just some junior file clerk. I want it on the desk of someone who will see this complaint for the frivolous, bad faith harassment that it is. I was hoping you still had a direct line to someone in management over there. Maybe Henderson. Bill Henderson. Sure, I play golf with him twice a month. Marcus said. He's the regional director now. Send me your package. I'll make sure Bill gets it. I'll also give him a little context. He owes me one after that fiasco with the Black Creek Watershed Project. Perfect, I said, a grim satisfaction settling over me. That's exactly what I needed. Thanks, Marcus. Don't mention it. And Alex, be careful. People like that, they don't give up. They just get crazier. I'm counting on it, I said before hanging up. I spent the next 2 days compiling my response. It was a work of art. It was more thorough and professionally documented than the DEQ's own initial site files. I included a cover letter that was a masterclass in polite, menacing competence. I laid out the facts, referenced the existing public records, and noted the suspicious, anonymous nature of the complaint, which so happens to coincide with an ongoing, documented campaign of harassment by the HOA leadership regarding my ownership of the lake in question. I didn't explicitly accuse Carol, but the implication was crystal clear. I emailed the entire 150-page PDF to Marcus. 2 days later, I got a call from a Mr. Peterson at the Pine County DEQ. His tone was profoundly apologetic. "Mr. Thompson, we received your documentation regarding the complaint on your property," he said, sounding weary. We appreciate your thoroughness. After reviewing the materials you provided, which frankly are more comprehensive than our own records, we've determined that a site visit is unnecessary. We are dismissing the complaint as unfounded. We apologize for any inconvenience this may have caused." "Thank you. I appreciate that," I said calmly. "Could you do me one favor?" "Of course, sir. What is it?" "Could you send me a formal letter confirming that the complaint was investigated and dismissed as baseless for my records?" "Absolutely. Mr. Thompson, I'll have it in the mail today." When the official letter arrived, I placed it carefully into the HOA harassment folder. The file was getting thick. Carol had tried to use the machinery of government against me, and the machine had spit her complaint right back out. I had won this round, decisively, but Marcus's warning echoed in my mind. They don't give up. They just get crazier. The thought sent a chill down my spine. What would she do next? Now that her indirect attacks had failed, how much crazier could she get? The answer, I would soon discover, was very. The failure of her DEQ gambit seemed to drive Carol into a quiet, simmering rage. For a couple of months, the direct attacks ceased. The Facebook posts stopped. No more letters appeared in my mailbox. But the atmosphere grew colder, more hostile. The shunning in the neighborhood became absolute. If I was out walking, people would cross the street to avoid me. It was a suffocating, oppressive silence, the kind that precedes a storm. I knew she was planning something. She was a predator, circling, waiting for a moment of weakness, searching for a new angle of attack. She found one, and this time, it was far more personal, aimed not at my property, but at my past. It happened on a crisp autumn afternoon. I was out front, raking the first of the falling leaves from a large oak tree on my lawn. I was actually feeling a sliver of the peace I'd been searching for. The air was cool. The work was mindless and physical, and the sun was warm on my back. A sleek, black sedan I didn't recognize pulled up to the curb. Carol Baxter got out of the passenger side. The man driving, a severe-looking man in a suit, remained in the car. Carol didn't approach with her usual blustering authority. There was a new look on her face, a venomous, triumphant smirk that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. She walked up to the edge of my driveway, stopping just short of my property line. "Thompson," she said, her voice low and smug. I leaned on my rake, not giving her the satisfaction of a greeting. "Carol." "I've been doing some research on you," she said, savoring each word. "It took some digging. You're a very private man, but you can't erase everything." She paused for dramatic effect. "Terra-struck development. You were a big shot there. Weren't you senior counsel for land use? A real heavy hitter." My blood ran cold. She had gone from petty neighborhood tyrant to conducting opposition research on me. This was a terrifying escalation. My time at Terra-struck was a part of my life I had deliberately put behind me. We were an aggressive, powerful firm. We built massive projects, dams, highways, entire new cities. We made fortunes for our investors, but we also made enemies. We fought environmental groups, eminent domain homeowners, and navigated a world of brutal corporate politics. I was good at my job. But it had taken a toll on my soul. That was what I was retiring from. "What's your point, Carol?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Her smirk widened. "My point is that a company like that, a big, powerful, publicly traded company, is very concerned with its image, very sensitive to public opinion. They wouldn't want one of their former top executives, a man who probably has a very generous pension and stock options, being seen as a neighborhood bully. Would they?" I stared at her, saying nothing, my mind racing through the implications. "They wouldn't want to be associated with someone who is embroiled in nasty community disputes," she continued, her voice a poisonous whisper. "Someone who is threatening his neighbors, hoarding community assets, and being investigated by environmental agencies. It's bad press, bad for the brand." The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was stunning. She was twisting every one of her own actions back on me. She had threatened me. She had instigated the dispute. She had filed the false complaint. And now, she was planning to frame me as the aggressor to my former employers. "I have a friend who sits on the board of a major news outlet in the city," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the man in the car. "We were just discussing how interesting a story it would be. Former corporate raider lawyer terrorizes suburban paradise. We could have a camera crew out here by the end of the week. Talk to all your poor, intimidated neighbors. Get some shots of your ridiculous cameras. I'm sure we could even get a comment from the terror-struck PR department. I wonder what they would have to say about your retirement activities." This was it, the ultimate threat. It was a vile, baseless, and brilliant move. An accusation of this nature, even if completely false, could be toxic. Terra-Struck's board was notoriously risk-averse when it came to PR. A public scandal involving a former senior officer could have repercussions for my pension, my unvested stock options, and my professional reputation, which, even in retirement, I valued. She was threatening my livelihood, my financial security, the very foundation of the peaceful life I had built. I felt a surge of rage so pure and so intense it almost buckled my knees. All the frustration, all the anxiety, all the accumulated insults and attacks of the past few months coalesced into a single point of white-hot fury. My hands clenched the wooden handle of the rake so tightly I could feel the splinters pressing into my palms. The calm, detached strategist was gone, replaced by something much more primal. But I held it in. I let none of it show on my face. I met her gloating stare with a look of utter stillness. I had faced down men who could buy and sell Carol Baxter 1,000 times over. Men who threatened not with vague PR scandals, but with financial ruin and litigation designed to last a decade. I knew how to handle a threat. You don't flinch. You don't negotiate. You absorb the blow. And then you end the fight. "Is that a threat, Carol?" I asked, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "It's a promise," she hissed. "I'm going to have that lake. It's going to be a community park. And we're going to put a nice, big plaque on a bench at the shoreline. A plaque that says, 'The Carol Baxter Community Point.' You have 1 week to sign over an access easement to the HOA. If you don't, the story runs. And my friend in the media will make sure it runs everywhere. Your old bosses at Terra-Struck will see it on the evening news." She stared at me for a moment longer, waiting for me to break, to argue, to beg. I gave her nothing. I just stood there, my eyes locked on hers, defeated. She couldn't get the reaction she craved. She gave a frustrated sniff, turned, and got back in the car. It drove away, leaving me standing in a pile of autumn leaves, the rake handle still creaking in my grip. The piece was over. The charade of a quiet retirement was done. She had crossed a line from which there was no return. She had tried to damage my property, She had tried to turn my neighbors against me. She had tried to use the government to crush me. And now, she had threatened the very foundation of my life's work. She thought she was threatening a retired lawyer. She had no idea. She had just threatened the man who had designed her prison, and she was about to demand he lock himself inside it. The game was over. It was time to pull back the curtain and show her exactly who she was dealing with. My next move would be my last, and it would be final. The final confrontation happened on a brilliantly sunny Saturday afternoon. The kind of day that should have been for barbecues and laughter, not for war. Carol had planned her checkmate move with a flair for the dramatic, ensuring a maximum audience. The HOA had scheduled its annual fall festival picnic on the common area that bordered my property. It was a calculated choice of venue. Bouncy castles for the kids were inflated. The smell of grilled hot dogs filled the air, and nearly every family in the development was in attendance. It was the perfect stage for my public humiliation and her final victory. I knew it was coming. An email had gone out from the board 2 days prior. Join us at the Fall Festival for a very special announcement about an exciting new community amenity. The subtext was a foghorn. I spent the morning not in dread, but in meticulous preparation. I opened the large, dust-covered footlocker in the back of my closet, the one marked TS Archive. Inside were dozens of leather-bound portfolios and rolls of blueprints. I selected 3 specific items: a thick, leather-bound volume labeled Willow Creek Estates, Master Covenants and Deed Restrictions, a large, rolled-up vellum sheet, and a slim file folder. I placed them in my briefcase. I put on a crisp button-down shirt and a blazer. It felt like putting on an old suit of armor. Around 2 p.m., the music from the festival suddenly cut out. A portable speaker crackled to life. It was Carol's voice, amplified and oozing with syrupy triumph. "Friends, neighbors, can I have your attention, please?" A crowd began to gather near the edge of my lawn. I watched from my living room window as she stood on a small, makeshift stage, flanked by her 2 loyal board members, Gary and Barb. "For months," she began, her voice resonating with faux sincerity, "your HOA board has been working tirelessly to correct a grave injustice. We were all promised, when we bought into this beautiful community, that the stunning lake at the heart of our neighborhood would be for everyone to enjoy." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Unfortunately, due to a clerical error by the developer and the selfish intransigence of one individual, that promise has been denied to us. Her eyes flicked towards my house. Every head turned to follow her gaze. I could feel their collective resentment aimed at my front door. I took that as my cue. I opened the door, stepped out, and walked calmly down my driveway. Briefcase in hand, I stopped at the edge of my lawn, a dozen yards from the crowd. The air crackled with tension. Carol's eyes lit up. This was even better than she had planned. A direct, public confrontation. "Ah, speak of the devil, Mr. Thompson has decided to join us." "I'm here to listen, Carol," I said, my voice calm and carrying easily in the sudden silence. "Good," she chirped, a predator's smile on her face. "Because today, this all ends. The board has voted, under the provisions of Section 12 of the HOA bylaws concerning community welfare, to exercise its right to reclaim this lake for the community. We are officially declaring the lake and a 20-foot perimeter around it to be a common area, effective immediately." A smattering of applause broke out. Gary, her crony, stepped forward holding a bundle of metal stakes and a roll of yellow tape, ready to mark their new territory. "You have no legal authority to do that, Carol," I said simply. "Oh, we do," she shot back. "And if you refuse to comply, We will consider you a trespasser on HOA land. In fact, she pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. I think we'll just get the police down here to supervise the transition. I'm sure they'll be very interested in your history of uncooperative behavior. She did it. She pressed the button and put the phone to her ear. Yes. I'd like to report a disturbance at Willow Creek Estates. We have a resident who is belligerently refusing to leave community property and is making threats against the HOA board. The crowd gasped. This was high drama. I simply stood my ground, my face impassive, and waited. 2 Pine County Sheriff's Department cruisers arrived within 10 minutes, their lights off, but their presence imposing. 2 deputies got out, a senior, weary-looking officer named Miller and his younger partner. "What's the problem here?" Miller asked, his eyes surveying the bizarre scene, the picnic, the crowd, Carol looking righteous, and me standing alone with a briefcase. "Officer, thank God you're here," Carol said, rushing forward. "This man, Alex Thompson, is on HOA common property and is refusing to leave. He's been harassing the community for months, and we are simply trying to reclaim a community asset for our children." She handed him a copy of the HOA bylaws, with her sham interpretation of Section 12 highlighted. Miller took the document and gave it a cursory glance. He then turned to me. "Sir, what's your side of this?" This was the moment, the culmination of months of harassment, the turning of the tide. I took a step forward and addressed not just the officer, but the entire assembled neighborhood. My voice was no longer the quiet retiree. It was the voice I used in courtrooms and boardrooms, a voice of absolute, unshakable authority. "My name is Alexander Thompson," I began, "and there seems to be a fundamental misunderstanding here that I would like to clear up. Ms. Baxter is operating under the assumption that she knows what the Willow Creek HOA is, and what its powers are. She is mistaken." I placed my briefcase on the grass, opened it, and took out the large, rolled-up vellum sheet. I spread it on the ground. It was the master plat map for the entire Willow Creek Estates development, signed and stamped by the county recorder. "This is the master plat," I said, pointing. "It is the foundational legal document for this entire community. And right here," I tapped a section outlined in red, "is Lot 1. You will note the red line extends to encompass the entirety of the body of water designated as Mirror Lake. This was filed with the county on November 5, 2019. I then pulled out the thick, leather-bound volume. These are the master covenants and deed restrictions for Willow Creek. Not the simplified bylaws Ms. Baxter is waving around, but the original, binding legal document that every single one of you agreed to when you purchased your homes. I opened it to a bookmarked page. I'll read from Article 2, Section 3, Designation of Common Areas. It lists the gatehouse, the North Park, and the walking trails. Then, I'll read from Section 4, Explicit Exclusions. And I quote, "The body of water known as Mirror Lake, located entirely within the bounds of Lot 1, as designated on the master plat, is hereby declared exclusive private property, appurtenant to said Lot 1 in perpetuity. No right of access, use, or claim by the association or its members shall exist now or ever." A stunned silence fell over the crowd. Carol's face had gone from smug to confused. But the developer," she stammered. "Let's talk about the developer," I said, my voice hardening. The developer was a company called Terra Struck Development. I let that name hang in the air for a second, watching Carol's face begin to pale as the pieces started to connect in her mind. I reached into my briefcase one last time and pulled out the slim file. From it, I produced a single, old photograph. It showed a group of men in suits and hard hats, standing in a muddy field, pointing at blueprints. In the background, the familiar hills that surrounded Willow Creek were visible. One of the men, younger, with darker hair, but unmistakably me, was at the center of the group, his finger on the very spot where we were all standing. "You see, Carol," I said, my voice dropping as I delivered the final, devastating blow. "You've been threatening to call my old bosses at TerraStruck. You've been slandering a former executive. There's just one more thing you didn't find in your research." I looked directly into her eyes, which were now wide with dawning horror. I wasn't just senior counsel for land use, for the Willow Creek project. I was the head of the entire development team. I am the man who found this land. I am the man who negotiated the purchase. I am the man who oversaw the engineers, designed the layout of the lots, and I am the attorney who personally wrote, signed, and filed every single word of the covenants you've been trying to use against me. The silence was absolute. You could have heard a leaf drop. The hot dog grill hissed. A baby started to cry and was immediately shushed. "I wrote the clause excluding the lake," I continued, my voice a hammer striking an anvil. "I did it to preserve the one pristine element of this land and to create a retirement property for myself that could not be touched by exactly this kind of petty tyranny. I didn't just buy into this community. Ms. Baxter, I built it. This isn't just my home. This is my signature on the landscape." I turned to Officer Miller, who was staring at me with a mixture of shock and dawning respect. "Officer, as you can see, there is no dispute. This woman has knowingly filed a false police report, is trespassing on my property, and has been conducting a months-long campaign of harassment against me, all of which I have meticulously documented." Carol Baxter stood frozen, her face a mask of utter, soul-shattering disbelief. Her weapon, the bylaws, had been revealed to be my shield. Her authority was a fantasy. Her entire world, built on the flimsy foundation of being the HOA President of a community she now knew was the brainchild of her sworn enemy, had crumbled to dust at her feet. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The Queen was naked, her power a complete illusion, and her entire kingdom was watching. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Officer Miller, a man clearly accustomed to dealing with suburban squabbles, instantly grasped the gravity of the situation. He turned to Carol, his weary professionalism replaced by a stern, authoritative tone. He cautioned her severely about the misuse of 911 services and filing a false report, noting that my evidence was compelling enough to press charges if I chose to. He then instructed her and her entourage to remove themselves from my property line immediately. The crowd, which had been Carol's adoring audience moments before, dissolved in a wave of embarrassed whispers and sideways glances. The spell was broken. They weren't looking at me as the neighborhood villain anymore. They were looking at Carol as a fool and a tyrant who had been publicly and comprehensively dismantled. Mr. Henderson, my quiet neighbor, caught my eye and gave me a slow, deliberate nod of respect. The social isolation I had endured evaporated in an instant, replaced by a palpable shift in the community's sentiment. The next day, a Sunday, I had my attorneys at my old firm draft a formal cease and desist letter to Carol Baxter and the entire HOA board, sent via courier. It was 20 pages long and detailed every instance of harassment, from the initial fine to the false DEQ complaint to the slanderous Facebook posts and the final, illegal threat against my livelihood. It outlined the potential for a massive civil lawsuit seeking damages for harassment, slander, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. It also formally demanded Carol's immediate resignation from the board. The letter landed like a bomb. An emergency HOA meeting was called that Wednesday. I did not attend. But I heard from Mr. Henderson that it was a bloodbath, faced with irrefutable evidence, and the looming threat of a lawsuit that would bankrupt the association. The board members turned on Carol, Gary, and Barb, seeing their own potential liability, were the first to abandon her. A vote of no confidence was called, and she was stripped of her presidency unanimously. Within a month, a for sale sign appeared on Carol Baxter's lawn. She left Willow Creek not with a bang, but with the quiet hum of a moving truck. A final, humiliating retreat. The house sold quickly. I never saw her again. A new board was elected, with the reasonable and level-headed Mr. Henderson as its new president. His first official act was to walk over to my house, shake my hand, and offer a formal, public apology on behalf of the entire community. He asked if I would be willing to consult with them to clarify and simplify the bylaws to prevent any future abuses of power. I agreed. And so, peace finally came to Lot 1. My mornings are now spent with coffee on my dock, the water still and reflective. My afternoons are for my roses, which have recovered and are now thriving. My evenings are for watching the sun set over my own private, quiet lake. The silence is no longer oppressive. It is the sound of victory. I came here seeking a sanctuary, and in the end, I had to fight a war to secure it. But as I sit here now, with the gentle lapping of water as the only sound, I know that the peace is all the sweeter because it was earned.